I will move my head a bunch, so I'll go back and forth. I often come up here with dressed somewhat in character. I like to do that. Today, I'm sorry I don't have a wallaby cape or a feathered headdress, but nevertheless, I do hope you enjoyed The Exiles. I think it was a wonderful book, and so we'll begin. We'll begin with the author, Chrisitina Baker Kline, and she was born in England, raised in the American South and in Maine, and she now lives in New York and also on Mount Desert Island in Maine, which sounds like kind of a neat place. She's widely traveled and extensively educated. She's a graduate of Yale and Cambridge, has a UVA in Master of Fine Arts. She has been an artist mentor at Duke and a fellow at Storybrooke University, and she's published 8 novels. The copy of The Exiles itself has a wealth of background information on the author, the characters, her writing style, her research, and other things, and it's worth taking a look at the acknowledgement section and the one called P.S., which includes photographs of Newgate Prison, the Cascades Female Factory, which is the infamous cruel institution that is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site and Museum. And there's also a portrait of the real Mathena in the back. I always do outside research as well. And when I reviewed the list that Kline had used for her research, I found that there was one book that I also used, and it was called The Tin Ticket by the Heroic Journey of Australia's Convict Women by Deborah Swiss. And I recommended this book to a couple of you, and I think you got it. It's excellent, and it just expands your knowledge of the life of the participants and the ancestors of present-day Australians. Historically, in 1787, Britain sent a fleet of ships to Australia. This first fleet of ships carried prisoners Britain wanted to get rid of, and their 759 convicts, 246 officers, Marines and crew and their families, and it included 200 women. Eventually, 160,000 men, women, and children, prisoners, were transported to Australia over the course of 80 years. 25,000 were women, and one account of this period reported, the transportation policy, in its haste to develop Australia, indiscriminately rounded up prisoners who were violent criminals, alcoholics, the mentally ill, and mothers of infants. It also accepted outcasts from higher society, such as children born of scandal, including the rumored illegitimate daughter of a prime minister. The program was not without its detractors. Well-to-do settlers getting rich on whale oil and wool resented both the convicts and the crown, and many signed a letter to His Majesty requesting the removal of unspeakable evils. We, the undersigned, feeling that the measures adopted by the British government of increasing the penal character of the colony affix a moral degradation upon us and our children, we request you will convene a public meeting of the colonists for the purpose of addressing the king thereon. This also made other newspapers. It was described as the scum and dregs of the offscourings of mankind by William U. Thorne, a Catholic priest who had served in Australia, and he was the leading critic of transportation. Rejecting the possibility of reform and redemption for young members, newspapers on both sides of the world declared, it is impossible to import the criminal without importing the crime. The Edinburgh Review had this to say: on what grounds does England assume the singular privilege of establishing colonies to be deluged and drowned with the flood of her own wickedness? What right have any country to turn even a wilderness into a school of sin, to create, even at the antipodes, huge nurseries of depravity, to pollute a young nation from its very birth, and to accentuate with its own corruption the sources whence countless generations are to spring? Today, about 20% of Australians, a total of about 5 million people, are descended from transported British convicts. But only recently have many Australians begun to come to terms with their own convict heritage and the legacy of colonization and its complex history of racism and opposition. Even today, the plight of the 19th century female prisoners sent from England, Scotland, and Ireland is unknown to many, as is the plight of the Aborigine people, whose way of life was destroyed when the colonists landed on their shore. The indigenous population of Australia and Tasmania are called Aborigines, the Latin root of which is from the beginning. There were 12 nations, each made up of about half a dozen tribes. The tribes spread out across the continent and the islands, forming clans. The clans, in turn, were made up of several families. They were nomadic. They developed their own language, religion, and customs. Having no written language, their history was passed down orally, through stories, songs, and art. And Kline weaves this into the character of Mathena, who remembers her songs and her stories and her memories as long as she can. The Aborigines were pushed off of their homeland by the invading Britons. Character is one of Kline's excellent style. She excels also in description, evocation of mood and emotion. We meet unbelievably cruel, selfish, mean-spirited people, and kind, tender-hearted, unselfish others. She deftly weaves the rewards of her extensive historical research into the fictional account of 3 women. Evangeline is the vicar's daughter. She is sheltered, educated. Now she's orphaned, with neither financial means nor practical skills, and she's pregnant by the son of her employer. There is also Hazel, a fatherless teenage daughter of a drunken midwife. Both are accused and convicted of crimes, held in Newgate prison, and sentenced to transportation to Australia. A sentence of any time, 7, 10, 20 years, generally meant life, because it would be so hard to get back to England from Australia. The third heroine is Mathena, an Aborigine and the daughter of a chieftain. She is also now orphaned and is sort of adopted, semi-adopted maybe, by the Governor John and Lady Jane Franklin. This is factual, not fiction. Sir John is distant, enamored of his second, much younger wife, Lady Jane, indulgent and clueless. She, on the other hand, is manipulative, cunning, and adept at getting her way. The exchange in the prologue clearly sets the tone. As Mathena danced in a circle with the others on the white sand, Lady Franklin kept looking at her with a curious smile. "Come here, my child," the governor's wife said when the dinner dance was over, beckoning with a finger. When Mathena obeyed, Lady Franklin peered at her closely before turning to her husband. Such expressive eyes and a sweet face, don't you think, dear? Unusually attractive for a native. Sir John shrugged. Hard to tell, they all look alike. What is her real name? Lady Franklin asked. Mary. And what was it originally? Originally, Mathena was her Aboriginal name. Well, I think she's charming, Lady Franklin said. I'd like to keep her. Sir John looked amused. You want to take her home with us? Yes. The girl is an orphan, isn't she? Yes, her father was a chieftain and her mother recently died. Does that make her a princess? Well, of course, I suppose. What do you think, Sir John? Sir John smiled beneficently. If you wish to amuse yourself in such a fashion, my dear, I suppose there's no harm in it. I think it will be entertaining. But if it isn't, we can always send her back. Mathena did not want to leave the island with these foolish people. She did not want to say goodbye to her stepfather and the other elders. She did not want to go to a strange place where nobody knew her. Tugging on Robinson's hand, she whispered, Please, sir, I don't. Slipping his hand from her grasp, he turned to the Franklins. We will make the necessary arrangements. Very well, Lady Franklin cocked her head, appraising her. Mathena. I prefer to call her that. It will be more of a surprise if she achieves the manners of a lady. Later on, at various times in the novel, Lady Franklin refers to Mathena as like a family pet. The painting of Mathena's portrait is like a scientific research project. And then she says she is a remnant of a native population about to disappear. And Lady Jane remains oblivious to the fact that they're being killed off by the English. Their final cruelty is revealed in a poignant exchange between Mathena, Hazel, and Ruby. The Franklins have returned to London, crassly leaving Mathena behind, not acknowledging or even realizing what an egregious sin they committed against her, taking her from her home, changing her language and her culture, and then abandoning her. The attitude of the actual Franklins is not much different. Despite public outcry about the perilous and fatal nursery, the governor's wife, Lady Jane, largely ignored the dying babies, constructing a botanical garden, a state college, and a museum of natural history modeled after a Greek temple were the tasks she readily performed from an elite distance. Writing her sister during the time of the scandal, the governor's wife revealed her true feelings. As for doing anything with the women here at the factory, it seems next to impossible, huddled as they are all together, and such impudent creatures, almost all of them. I think the whole system of female transportation so faulty and vicious that to attempt to deal with the women who are the subjects of it seems a waste of time and labor. One aspect of Kline's style is the use of quotations from writings of the period, the early 1800s, at the beginning of each section. She even included an excerpt from the diary of Eleanor Franklin, who was the daughter of Sir John Franklin, the Lieutenant Governor of Van Diemen's Land, 1837 to 1843. And this is what she said in her diary about Mathena. The last Aborigines were caught about a fortnight ago and sent to Flinders Island, so that our little native girl is the only one remaining here. She is improving, I think, though it will be a long time before she becomes quite civilized. There are other very harsh chapter beginnings, one on Evangeline. I never knew an instance of any female convict coming out that I would consider a fair character. Their open and shameless vice cannot be told. Their fierce and untamable audacity would not be believed. They are the pest and gangrene of the colonial society. And lower than the brutes, a disgrace for all human existence. And this was written by James Moody in the, I'm having a hard time reading the little tiny print, The Felony of New South Wales, being a bountiful picture of the real romance of life in Botany Bay. For Hazel, it is much the same. As for females, it is a melancholy fact, but not the less true, that far the greatest proportion are utterly irreclaimable, being the most worthless and abandoned of human beings. No kindness can conciliate them, nor any indulgence render them grateful, and it is admitted by everyone that they are, taken as a body, infinitely worse than males. This was from Lieutenant Bolton in Examinations in New South Wales, Western Australia, and Van Diemen's Island during the years 1830 to 33. And two short ones on chapters on Mathina. We make no pompous display of philanthropy. The government must remove the natives. If not, they will be hunted down like wild beasts and destroyed. And this was from the Colonial Times in Tasmania, December 1st, 1826. Another. It is increasingly apparent the Aboriginal natives of this colony are, and have ever been, a most treacherous race, and that the kindness and humanity which they have always experienced from the free settlers has not tended to civilize them to any degree. And this was by George Arthur, who was the governor of Van Diemen's Land. And something about him from the Tin Ticket, one of my references. Colonel George Arthur was a consummate bureaucrat. He wrote the Cascade rules and regulations himself with military precision. He demanded of all the female convicts on their admission the utmost cleanliness, the greatest quietness, perfect regularity, entire submission. It must be observed, if these be observed, patient industry will appear, and reformation of character must be the result. He didn't know the women convicts very well, did he? The rules were printed everywhere, this in spite of the fact that most of the women in the Cascades could not read. Kline also excels in establishing mood, whether it be of place, as in the cells of Newgate Prison, in the stifling air, the wild-eyed, insane inmates crouching in the corners, filthy, mold and mildewed, encrusted sleeping mats, and rats scurrying everywhere. Also, though, you see it in her mood and emotion in a person. One day soon, the ship would land, and she would serve her time. She'd learn that she could withstand contempt and humiliation, and that she could find moments of grace in the bedlam. She learned that she's strong. The sheltered, unworldly governess who'd entered the gates of Newgate was gone, and in her place was someone new. She barely recognized herself. She felt as flinty as an arrowhead, as strong as stone, and that is Evangeline. Other aspects of style, plus some about Hazel. Hazel tried not to think of Ruby alone at the orphanage. She focused her attention on the sopping laundry, the stains and spots, the bar of lye soap in her hand. Warm water, rinsing water, ice water, mangled. As soon as she finished one piece, she started another. She did not retort when provoked by the guards. When she needed to move, she did it stealthily, like a cat. At mealtime, she wended her way toward the gruel without drawing attention. She stayed as quiet as she could. This, she found, was the trick. You didn't have to react to every little thing. You could just exist and let your mind simmer over a low fire. And now I will tell you about the tin ticket. The tin ticket was worn by every female convict transported from Newgate Prison for the harrowing journey halfway around the world to Van Diemen's Land and the Cascade Female Factory, which is what the women's prison was called. The tin ticket was devised by a Quaker reformer, Mrs. Elizabeth Fry, a real person. It was a numbered tin disc worn around the neck on a red ribbon or cord, such as. The numbers on the ticket corresponded to numbers on the ship's list, which was kept by the ship's surgeon and followed the convict to prison for the rest of her sentence. Evangeline receives hers. Mrs. Fry pulled out a flat disc on a red cord and held it in her palm. The disc appeared to be made of tin. A number was stamped onto the metal, 171. From now on, you will be known by this number, Mrs. Fry said. It will be printed on and sewed into every item you possess. It will be kept in a ledger that will be passed from the ship surgeon to the warden of the prison. You will wear this ticket for the duration of the journey, with God's blessing. Evangeline frowned, a feeling of defiance. After all she'd been through, all she'd had to accept, to be known by a number, it's degrading. Touching Evangeline's hand with her fingertips, Mrs. Fry said, "It's to be sure that you are accounted for, that you are not lost to the winds." Evangeline felt like a horse resisting a bridle. Resistance, she knew, was pointless. The horse always ends up in the bridle, and so would she. Now I would like to tell you who actual tin ticket wearers were. Somebody has Evangeline's number, 171. Actual holders were number 253. Okay. You are Agnes McMillan, age 17. You're transported for theft, habit, repute, previous convictions, robbing a shop, housebreaking, disobedience of orders many times after transportation. You've been sentenced for 7 years. 284 is Janet Houston. Also age 17, not much better, Janet. Transported for theft, habit, previous convictions, and bad character. Also, being absent all night, living in a state of adultery with a free man, being advanced in pregnancy, your sentence of 12 months labor in the Female House of Correction, and also a sentence of 7 years. Now, Agnes and Janet together, from age 12 in Glasgow, Scotland, lived on the streets, and they had to go by a life of crime because that was all they had. They picked pockets, stole from shops. They made pennies from Agnes's singing because she had a kind of a nice voice, and that was against the law too. Now, ticket 151, somewhere. You are Tedder Ludlow. I want you to notice the age of this person, 47.
Oh.
being transported with her daughter Arabella, aged 9. Tedder was a widow that had 5 children. She was transported for larceny, stealing from her master, and from the hospital at the House of Corrections where she worked as a nurse. She was extremely qualified. She was a cook and a house servant, and she served as a nurse on board the ship. She was separated from Arabella, who was put into the orphans' home, which was done. They felt that if they separated the parent from the children, that the parent would give better work, and they wanted to raise the children to become the kind of citizens that they wanted in Australia. In closing, Kline herself did not write the Exiles to be a comment on the social evils of race and oppression of indigenous people. No, this is the story of the women, victims of the cruelty and injustice of the system of privilege and class, who by their wits and determination became the ancestors and builders of a great nation. Now, as to the holders of the 10 tickets today, as my last duty, I hereby absolve you of the charges of the sentences against you. You may remove your 10 tickets and go in freedom. And my 10 ticket has my birthday on it. That was all that was listed. Any questions, comments? Okay. Thank you all for coming. I hope you like the book. If you haven't read it, I hope you will. Go ahead.
Did you find it depressing?
A lot of it was because, and I didn't include a lot of the terrible conditions, like the hold of the ship and then the prison itself they were in, except for the short thing I said about the cells at Newgate. But they were so determined to, and not to give up. A lot of people did, and just wasted away. And in one place it tells how the guards would just come in and pull them out and throw them in the in the courtyard. So, but I think in the end it's uplifting.
Good.
And it's true. It's what happened. It really was. And all of our countries have histories that have problems, you know. So it is. Go ahead.
I thought it was really very uplifting all the way along, because the women who were at least the focals in this one were so strong and learned to live in the moment and take advantage of the moment and survive in the moment, and not really punishing themselves for the past. There was always kind of an acceptance of either I was a victim and now I know I was a victim, or this happened to me, but that doesn't define them exactly.
Yeah.
I thought it was encouraging all the way through.
Except, of course, when Evangeline drowns.
But
I've had people come to me and
that.
say, how could she kill her? But that was the story. That was the storyline.
Somewhere on the ship before they landed, one of the crew said to one of the women, you'll do well not to consider this as a sentence, but as an opportunity. And so
the ship's surgeon, I think,
I guess he was the
said
one who did that.
He
And
was very encouraging.
listen to the statistics that you told about how many today are descendants from those original women. They did use it as an opportunity.
And of course, the convicts, the people working on the ship were also convicts. They were, they could serve as ship workers, sailors, as part of their sentence. And of course, a lot of them would choose that because that's better than just being, well, working in the fields and in the mines, all the places that they use the convict labor. So that was better duty, but they were terrible characters.
I can't recall her name right now, but the really strong, dyed-in-the-wool convict type woman that protected Evangeline a little bit and was with her.
That was Olive.
And Olive.
Olive.
Who made her own way, made her own connections, even pairing up with one of the ship crew members.
Yes.
Right away for
Yes.
protection.
Yes, but right from there to the prison, and for the rest of the time that she is a part of the story, she's survival, she's somewhat fair in her dealings with other people, and encouraging for those around her. Interesting character. I would have liked to have known more about her.
About Olive, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much.